New York City is one of the largest cities in the world. Even with 5 boroughs, New York City is very densely populated. This means that the city faces tons of waste every day, and currently we have no landfills to store that waste. To deal with all the waste, the city uses waste transfer stations where, as the name suggests, waste is transferred from smaller garbage trucks to large transports such as larger trucks or garbage barges. Waste transfer stations create a lot of problems for the surrounding community, including odors, air emissions, and a buildup of hazardous materials. However, waste transfer stations are not placed equally throughout the city. Instead, they are usually built in poor and minority neighborhoods. This is part of a concept called waste inequity, which, in this case, disadvantages poor and minority neighborhoods by having those neighborhoods deal with the negative effects of the waste disproportionately when compared to richer and whiter neighborhoods. Waste transfer stations act as transfer ports for transporting local waste to landfills outside the city. These transfer stations allow waste from the city to be brought here and then shipped away by trucks or barges. They allow NYC to efficiently and effectively dispose of waste. The city is divided into sections, determining which waste station garbage trucks unload their waste. Unfortunately, these stations are so unevenly distributed throughout the city that only 3 neighborhoods see nearly 3/4 of the city's trash move along their streets, according to the New York Times. Having this much waste pass through one area is very hazardous for the health of the inhabitants of those areas. The placement of these transfer stations is clearly not a coincidence. Transfer stations are mainly located in North Brooklyn and South Bronx. These areas are composed mainly of people of color and people making under $35,000, according to Clean Up North Brooklyn. This is racism and oppression of the poor as they are given worse living conditions, which aids in perpetuating generational inequality. The waste transfer stations would greatly devalue property, and that effect ripples through the area because lower property values means a poorer area, meaning lower taxes, and therefore lower quality of public services such as education. The rich and white are being avoided at the expense of the health of people of color and the poor. As seen on this map, there is a high concentration of waste transfer stations, specifically in Greenpoint and Maspeth, and also lots of transfer stations in the South Bronx, Brooklyn, and the west coast of Staten Island. These areas all have low median income and a large minority population, which means that these waste transfer stations are specifically built in these low-income and minority communities. This waste inequality, like most other inequalities, favors richer and wider communities at the expense of poorer and minority neighborhoods. This waste inequity is part of a bigger trend known as environmental racism, which according to greenaction.org is defined as the disproportionate impact of environmental hazards on people of color. This environmental racism and waste inequity specifically gives more of a disadvantage to residents who already have the handicap of being poor and at the losing end of other types of racism. This further separates the rich from the poor and perpetuates systemic racism, which is an unjust equality that still must be made just. One question that must be put forward is, how did this inequality come to be? For waste inequity in New York City specifically, the waste transfer stations were built in poorer and people of color neighborhoods due to the city policy being drafted by overwhelmingly rich and white people. This continues as these richer people serve their own interests by having these waste transfer stations that defile their surrounding communities with pollution and foul scents built by private companies in these poorer neighborhoods. This waste inequity is also a global issue, with richer countries dumping their trash on the developing world. However, though still present in large amounts, this global waste inequity has been decreasing due to global policies like the Basel Convention. In New York City, currently, the New York City Environmental Justice Alliance is advocating for policies such as the SWMP, Solid Waste Management Plan, that aims to change NYC's, quote, polluting truck-based system confined to a handful of overburdened communities to a water-based, less polluting barge system that relies on a network of equitably sited, city-owned marine and rail transfer systems, according to the NYC EJA themselves. This policy is actually making progress, and construction of a marine transfer station in the wealthy Upper East Side that can be seen in this image is done, despite hundreds of thousands of dollars spent in opposition. In order to fix this inequality, the SWMP must continue to be fiercely advocated for and must make it through the opposition of richer communities. This can be done with voting and funding and making sure the opposition, funded by real estate interests in richer communities, doesn't have its way. As with many other policies pushing towards more equitable development, it will be tough to pass, but for the sake of equality, we must fight the injustice, no matter how tough it is.